Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 78 of Blown Speakers. I'm Dave Hoenigman coming in from Yokohama, Japan, and I'm welcoming back our special guest, Ed Chan. How are you this morning, Ed?
Howdy. Doing well, doing well.
It's a beautiful, crisp Sunday morning. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've chosen our topic for today. So let me share. Okay, so Robert Haigh. Let me make this full screen.
Yeah, I guess from the beginning, I'll note that. So for up until like last week, I always called him Robert Haigh, but I think that's incorrect, and so I think it's actually supposed to be pronounced Robert Haigh. But apologies to Robert Haigh if that's incorrect.
Hmm. You're seeing my
Yeah, yeah,
it's full screen on your end,
it
right?
is. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, okay, and the album, or it's actually an EP you've chosen,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Juliet of the Spirits from 1985.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And okay, for the uninitiated, okay, can you tell us who is this guy? Where is he from? What kind of music does he make?
Okay, I'll give it a go. He's a kind of a mysterious guy. There's not a lot written about him, and he had even in the like kind of music scenes that he was involved with, he had a pretty low profile, except for his apparently massive success as a drum and bass. I don't know, composer. I don't know what to call it. A drum and bass person in the I guess it was the 90s as the Omni Trio. So um, yeah, but I'm mostly interested in his work from the late, I guess it'd be the late 1970 or about 1980, and then his later work after the Omni Trio as Robert Haigh. Okay, early on, he was sort of involved. So he's from, I think he's originally from Cornwall, I want to say, in England. Like, and I don't know geography in England, so, but I think it's not far from London. And he lived in London for a number of years, and he talks about in interviews that like sort of one of the formative experiences he had was working at I want to say it was one of the Virgin record stores in London. I think not the main one, but I think one of the branches, anyways, where he worked as an employee, and it was apparently a gathering place for a bunch of sort of interesting characters in the early Brit English or British industrial music scene in the late 70s, early 80s. So the most famous person would be Stephen Stapleton, who puts out music mostly under the name Nurse with Wound. And then also the other person that's mentioned too as of some note is Jim Thirlwell. He also is known as J.G. Thirlwell, and he had some success as releasing work under the title uh, "Scraping Fetus Off the Wheel," and then he actually also fetus was the key word, and he changed the title of the band to different variations of something about fetus. Um, so, anyways, okay, so as I don't know how old Haigh was when he worked at the record store, but I think he was early 20s or something like that, and he was involved in the kind of post-punk scene in England at that time. And his first band was called Truth Club, and they put out one split, I think it was a 7-inch, yeah, a 7-inch with another group called Fote, which was basically actually the same group, the same people, but maybe without one person. And that came out in 1980. And it's, to be honest, I don't listen to it that much, but it is kind of like that British post-punk stuff that was coming out around the late 70s, early 80s. And then, as with his band Fote, he released a couple other EPs. And then he started to release music under the name SEMA, SEMA. And that stuff was more like sort of experimental, like almost like musique concrète in a way, like kind of avant-garde classical influence, like I guess some John Cage and other stuff like that. But it's much more in that vein. It's not really rock at all. And then early on in his career, he also contributed to certain releases by the Nurse with Wound group, Stephen Stapleton. And I think even while he was doing this, and maybe even during the Truth Club and Folk period, the post-punk period, he developed this interest in the piano, and he started to make music. And some of this is in the musique concrète stuff that he did as SEMA, where he would combine like kind of solo, very to my ears, classical like style piano with again, like noise and other kind of breaking glasses and things like that, to like kind of spice it up. And then he started to he did a bunch of stuff as SEMA or SEMA. I'm not even really sure how it's supposed to be pronounced. Then he started to release music under his name, Robert Haigh, and it sort of progressively became more like, I mean, the word that I want to say, I guess, is beautiful, like more like pretty, beautiful music, but with still elements of dissonance and like kind of atonality and stuff like that. But and then progressively, as he released more stuff under that name, it became more and more like these very contemplative, like solo piano pieces that people often compare to like people like Eric Satie, and Harold Budd comes up a lot as well. Like, so some of Harold Budd's stuff with Brian Eno in the 70s and things like that. And then I guess this is like sort of the late 80s. Or no, I'm sorry, it's more like in the 90s. So he, like at some point during this, he moves out away from London to a kind of smaller town in I can't remember what it's called. I want to say it's in Hertfordshire, which is like on the outskirts of London. But he moves there to open up a record store with his wife, and it's a typical, I think, small independent record store. And he notices, I think at first they really struggle, like trying to like kind of keep this business afloat. But then the whole like kind of, I'm not really sure of the correct terms to use here, but like the drum and bass scene and electronica and house music and all that stuff, techno, whatever, starts to take hold in the UK, and a lot of the young people that are coming into a store are really into this, and they want, and so he starts to sell this and starts to make money, become successful as a business. And then he gets interested in making this music himself, and he finds out he can just buy this cheap computer and some software and start doing the stuff himself. So he starts to release this kind of drum and bass stuff. And eventually, he goes through a bunch of different like names for his musical entity, but eventually it becomes the Omni Trio, and had the magic touch or whatever, and the Omni Trio became very, very popular and successful. Um, and so he does that for like most of the 90s, but he all during this time he's also composing these like solo piano pieces, and eventually once he burns out of the drum and bass / jungle scene, he starts to release this piano music under his name Robert Haigh again. And so and he's been doing that kind of stuff since then. And I think his most recent release was from last year, called Human Remains on Unseen Worlds Records, and that is in that like solo piano tradition. Okay, so that's a kind of dirty summary.
I like that story though. I like the idea, because I read that article you sent me last night, the Simon Reynolds piece, and when he said he and his wife opened that kind of small record store, and they were hoping to make a go at it, and I think, did they say they had kids? Did they have 2 or 3 kids?
I think they had 2 kids. Yeah.
Okay, so that would have added to the pressure. Like, I got to figure out how to make money out of this record store, right?
Exactly.
And then like the kids or the customers. I like that these kids just start showing up, wanting a specific kind of music that he didn't know anything about, and then he realizes that he could do it, and he becomes like a pioneer in the field. I mean, that's I mean, that's be an interesting biopic.
Yeah. I mean, it's great how it just worked. It turned out, because if he had never done that drum and bass stuff, I don't think he would have been able to put out all these recordings of this piano music, which I'm going to guess is his like kind of main sort of passion. And which is not to say that he was doing the Omni Trio drum and bass stuff like cynically and just to make money, but because I think he was genuinely interested in it. But it seems to me like his main passion has been this like kind of solo piano stuff that he does.
So with Omni Trio, what is there? Is there a main work that we should know, or was it more
probably? And to be honest, I mean, I don't really know them that well. I only have a couple of their releases. But the ones that I keep seeing referenced a lot are the Haunted Science from 1996, and this is on the label Moving Shadow, which was run by a friend of his, but I think was like really central to the drum and bass scene in that area outside of London, and maybe even in London itself. And then the other one is what is it called? There's one called Bite Size Life from 1999. And then the Haunted, I want to say, the Haunted Science from 1996. I think I read somewhere that it's sort of considered to be, I don't know if it's the first jungle form of drum and bass or techno or whatever it is, but it's somehow had a very fundamental role, at least in British drum and bass and electronic music like that. I guess what the kids are now calling EDM, right? Electronic dance music. So I think those are the kind of 3 main ones. But the first one he did was Mystic Steppers. It was an EP in 1993. And then he had done some stuff under a different name called Splice, and then worked with some other people as well, doing some of that early drum and bass stuff.
Okay, so we'll look extensively at his discography in a bit, but just I guess to focus on this album or this EP. Right. So out of all of his material, why did you choose this album?
So I think this is the first piece that, like, to put it very bluntly and even in a kind of cheesy way, it's the first one I fell in love with. When I fell in love with his music. I mean, I think I had heard a few other things before that. Actually, yeah, I was trying to remember, and I mean, this is like the late 1980s, and so I'm in college, and this in Southern California, and it's a little bit hazy to me, but I think I want to say I was even trying to think of like who turned me on to him in the first place, and it could have been one of my friends who was a roommate named Antal. Give him a shout out. Who, I mean, he actually influenced my musical taste a lot, with a lot of things. Like even the Meat. I think I first learned about the Meat Puppets from him, the show we did previously. Or it was this other guy named, I think his name was Brian, and so this is typical American college life. I was living in the dorms. We would all like kind of hang out together. And then, there was this older student, he was like 2 or 3 years above us, started to turn us on to industrial music and like some of this like much more extreme stuff than like college rock and alt rock in the 1980s. And so some of that stuff would have been like Throbbing Gristle, who was like probably one of the preeminent English industrial bands from the late 70s, early 80s. And then also Soviet France, who we've talked about doing a show about as well. And so it's possible that he maybe was also the one that turned me on to Robert Haigh stuff in general. So Juliet of the Spirits wasn't the first one I heard, but it was, again, I think so as I said, the first one I fell in love with. But actually, now that I think about it, the other EP that we'll talk about, Music from the Antechamber, might have been the first one I bought and the first one that I actually did fall in love with. But then when I heard Juliet of the Spirits, which actually came out a year before Music from the Antechamber, I mean, that one just, I don't know, it really blew me away and has always stuck with me. And I often think of it as, in my mind, the most beautiful song in the world. And I'm talking about the side A, Juliet of the track Juliet of the Spirits. There's one other track on the other side as we'll get into, but Music from the Antechamber also, I think, is also a very beautiful album. And I think for me, what's important about Haigh and the type of music he does that I'm really drawn to is that he's combining both beauty and like, really like almost achingly beautiful like melodies and sounds with dissonance and atonality and noise and things like that. And that kind of comes from his, post-punk and associations with industrial music in the early 80s. And maybe industrial is another, maybe a term we should talk about a bit, because it, I think it really starts in England with like Throbbing Gristle and some of those other groups. Cabaret Voltaire is thrown in there as well. And then, so there's like a period that it's sort of, this becomes this thing until the, I don't know, mid 80s or whatever. But then you start to get this other music by people that, well, I think there were earlier people, but the group I think that made it famous was 9 Inch Nails, right? And people start to describe them as industrial music. So then, people like me had to like then go back and sort of qualify industrial music with either ambient industrial or British industrial or something else, because that term then becomes co-opted for these other groups like 9 Inch Nails that are described as industrial music. So when I say industrial music, I mean this like kind of British late 70s, early 80s kind of stuff. So he kind of comes out of that scene too.
So do you consider Nine Inch Nails industrial, or do you think that term is
I,
misused?
yeah, I don't. I don't. But again, I mean, I think it's just because of like kind of my age and my generation
Hmm.
and my exposure to that British stuff earlier on. I mean, I don't have a problem with Nine Inch Nails being called industrial, but again, it's something very different than what I had gotten used to thinking of as industrial music.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah.
Hmm. Why don't we listen, since you mentioned track A, the title track, Juliet
Mhm.
of the Spirits, as the most beautiful song in the world? Is that what
In
you
the world, yes.
Okay. So I mean that seems like a good setup. Should we listen to a bit of that?
Please. So just to warn the listeners, it's going to take a while for it to build up.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is it not the most beautiful song in the world?
Yeah, beautiful. Open.
And actually, as we were playing that, it occurred to me that in a way that this piece isn't necessarily representative of his later work, which is more just solo piano. Um, like I think he rarely uses guitar, and I assume he's playing all the instruments on this. And so, this, it has that like kind of, I'm going to guess it's a sample, but maybe it's a created sound that opens the piece with that like kind of ominous horror movie soundtrack kind of beginning, and then the guitar comes in, and then the piano. And so his more recent stuff for the last, like, I think 10 years or so is really just like kind of solo piano without a lot of like treatment as well. Like some of the pieces do have treatment, but a lot of it is just like kind of straight piano stuff. But again, for me, this album, this EP was really what captured my admiration and fascination.
So what you've said is, we've talked about off camera, that some of the YouTube clips of this song are actually played at the wrong speed.
Yes. Yeah, it's played at a faster version. And I guess the other thing we should point out about this piece is that there is an earlier version of it that appears. Let's see, I have this written down somewhere. Where is it? Oh yeah. What? No. Okay, give me a second here. Yeah, there's another version of this that is faster, is played at a faster pace. Now I'm not seeing it on my. I thought I made a note about it. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, so in 1984, he put out a release under Robert Haigh and Sema, so his two different monikers, and it's called Three Seasons Only, and the piece is called Empire of Signs, and it's an early version of this Juliet of the Spirits, and it is faster. Like the guitar is much faster, and maybe even the piano. So the YouTube video version that I saw for Juliet of the Spirits, I don't think it's. I mean, I actually don't think it's the early version from. I don't think it's the Empire of Signs version, but it's played at that like kind of speed. So. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, but I'm pretty sure this is the right speed. I mean, I could be wrong, because it's an EP, a 12-inch EP. It's supposed to be played at 45 RPM, as it says on the label. But so I suppose it is possible that I'm playing it at 33 RPMs, and it's actually supposed to be faster. But to be honest, I like it this way more, even if it's supposed to be that other fashion. But no, I'm pretty sure I haven't done this in a long time, but I'm pretty sure I've checked and played it at 45 or yeah, that I played it at both speeds, and I mean, I think this is the right one.
Okay. So for me, it's kind of hard to imagine when you were a university student and you guys are listening to Throbbing Gristle and some of the West Coast stuff you're listening to, Minutemen, etc. It's hard for me to imagine like this cooler, older student showing up with the with this album and turning you guys onto it. Like, I mean, you were more open-minded than I was at that age, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, and to be honest, I mean, I don't think he would show up with this album. I mean, but it was this like kind of British industrial stuff from at least the early 80s. And that stuff, like, so for example, Soviet France is much more like, it's less classical sounding, and it's more experimental or whatever, but it's still very different than like rock music, and even alternative or indie rock or even post-punk or whatever. But I think by this point in time, I'm like just interested in all types of music, and especially anything that is like kind of going towards experimental and alternative like kind of forms of music. I think I will always have, and I always will like straightforward rock, indie rock, alt rock, whatever, punk rock, etc. But I think part of what I think attracts me to those types of music is that it is alternative to like kind of mainstream music. And so for me, I guess this kind of stuff fits into that category, it fits that bill. And so that's, I think, why I was able to get into this kind of stuff. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, it's very different than like kind of the other stuff that I was into at that time. And then, and I do, and I guess I would say, I mean, during this period in the late 80s, I think mostly I was into the indie rock stuff. And then I was just like sort of branching out into this other stuff like this.
So as we discussed, he took the title from a Fellini film. Let's see, I have a visual for that. Right, here we go. Right. I was going to write down the year for this, but I didn't. It's in the 60s, right?
I think it's the 60s, yeah.
So do you have any idea why he would have named the EP after this Fellini film?
I don't. I have no idea. And I mean, I can't remember if in that Simon Reynolds interview, if he mentions that he took the title from this film. I'm assuming he did. Actually, Juliet of the Spirits might be from the 70s, because I think it's a later Fellini piece.
Okay.
It's in color. So it might be, I think now I'm thinking it's from the 70s, but anyways, I think, I'm guessing it's taken from this, but I don't know why he did that. I mean, if he just liked Fellini, because I don't think I'm not aware of any other Fellini references that come up in interviews or in any of his other work. As we talked about before, off camera, he has tended to borrow a lot of titles and makes a lot of references to other books, films, etc.
I'll get a quick year on that while we're here. Let's see. Fellini, Juliet of the Spirits.
Lex says good.
Spirits is a 1966 movie directed.
Oh, 66. Okay.
Yeah.
Starring Juliet.
It also says 65. Well, yeah, 66, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how he does that. I mean, he's I mean, it's a very minimal piece, but through the title, he's clearly paying tributes to Fellini, right?
Yeah.
And so, as you mentioned, there's just only 2 tracks on here. Now, so I noticed you have the vinyl. So you have the vinyl of both these EPs. Did you buy those back in the day, or?
Yeah, I think Juliet of the Spirits I had to track down much more, like much later, and it was very rare for a long time, and I'm sure I paid a lot of money for it. And I was just looking at Discogs, and now you can buy it for sen yonhyaku yen. So I don't know, it's close to $10. I'm sure I probably bought it for like $20 or $30 or something like that. Whenever the music from the Antechamber I did buy in the day back when it was selling in record stores. So yeah, but I think this one I had to get later on.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Looking at the back cover, right? Yeah, it's interesting. I like the purple. When I first saw it, to me, it looks like crayon, right? Like a kid's scribble,
Yeah.
But the more the purple crayon, I'll call it, in the background. But the more I looked at it, I wasn't sure what it.
Yeah, I've never looked at it that closely, so I didn't know. Yeah, I mean, it also looks like it could be like, one of those like stains from like a microscope slide, like of a
Okay.
like a cell or something like that. I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
no idea what it is.
yeah. It's
And
an
then there's got
interesting.
the ballerina picture, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting composition on both sides.
Yeah.
So as you've mentioned, Robert Haigh is rather well, we wouldn't say reclusive, but he does avoid the limelight, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So there are not even a lot of pictures of him
Mhm.
on the internet. So just I found these. Uh, this
Looking very introspective.
Yeah, this series of pictures are clearly from the same setting or session. Um, there's also a picture of him with a hat on. I've seen it in a few
Yeah,
places.
yeah.
Huh. And yeah, as you've mentioned, not many interviews over the years. So,
Mhm.
um, so do you meet many people, or have you dealt with many people who are into his like these works, these piano works?
No, and yeah, I mean, so I think some of my friends when I was in college also liked it. But since then, apart from that, I don't know that I've ever actually met anyone who liked Robert Haigh and even maybe even knew who he was. Um, I mean, he had a very, very low profile. I remember, okay, so this is in the early 90s. So I'm in graduate school now. I'm in like Western New York. And the early days of the internet, dial-up internet. And I I get in touch with like so and this is also like when the transition to CDs and like MP3s and that kind of stuff had happened. And I wasn't so technologically advanced, so I didn't know how to like take the record file and turn it into a computer file that I could listen to on that I could put on a CD or whatever. And through some like online forum or I don't remember what forum it was. I found someone who who was like in all apologies to Robert Haigh, but who was illegally sort of selling a compact disc of this EP. I think the music from the Antechamber and maybe some other stuff as well. Who so had transferred it into computer files, and then I was able to get it that way. Um, so and when I purchased that from this person, he mentioned, yeah, I don't know a lot about drum and bass, but I hear that Robert Haigh now has a lot of success as this group Omni Trio, or as releasing music under the name Omni Trio. And so that was just online. I never met this person in person in real life. And then yeah, otherwise I really I can't think of anyone else that I've ever come across or met who liked his stuff or knew about his stuff. I mean, I think people I've played it for really like it, but yeah, but it's not very well known. I mean, I think in the last 10 to 15 years or whatever, since he's released a lot of these like solo piano albums on a variety of labels. He's become more well known, like sort of, I think in, I don't know what scene to call it, but I guess I would say people who like ambient music and yeah, because I don't, he certainly, I think, doesn't really register with people who are fans of classical music, even though some of this stuff sounds like classical music. I think it's really only these people who are in these weird, like, kind of niches of music that come across this music. So yeah, eventually when we take a look at the discography, we can see like some of the labels that are putting his stuff out. And I mean, now I think he's become more well known. But again, like, yeah, on a like kind of personal basis, I really haven't run into anyone that has also been into Robert Haigh. But and also as we talked about before off camera, I don't think he performs this music live. So it's not really out there. It's really only through the recordings that people find out about him. I mean, I do think his work with as Omni Trio did really sort of raise the profile of him. And so some people may have gotten into some of this piano stuff and other stuff through that, like, kind of Omni Trio stuff. But yeah, I've never come across someone.
So we shouldn't hold our breaths if we're expecting him to come perform this music in Tokyo anytime soon, huh?
Yeah, that's right. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, because he does have this, like, kind of connection to Japan through the label Siren Records and this guy Daisuke Suzuki, which, as I told you before, I couldn't find out any information about the label or the person. And Daisuke Suzuki also makes music and has some releases with this guy Andrew Chalk, who I can't remember where he's from. I think he's either from the UK or Australia. I want to say the UK. And they've done they have a few collaborative pieces that that are available on Bandcamp and things like that. But I couldn't even find, like, solo work by Daisuke Suzuki. So he's kind of a mystery man as well. But so I don't think it's in the interview, the Simon Reynolds interview, but it was in another interview that Haigh talks about being contacted out of the blue by Daisuke Suzuki, who really liked an album that Robert Haigh put out as Robert Haigh and Silent Storm. And Silent Storm actually is actually Robert Haigh. So it's a fictional, like, kind of group. But he put out an album called From the Air in what was it? Oh, shoot. I want to say it was like in the 90s. Sorry. I'm sorry, 2007. So Robert Haigh and Silent Storm, From the Air. Oh, and actually it was put out by a Japanese label, called Seal Pool, which I've never heard of before. But anyways, he was contacted by Daisuke Suzuki, I think, who had heard this album and liked it and wanted to put out some of his music. And so Robert Haigh eventually put out, I think, 3 or 4 CDs on Siren Records that are his, like, kind of solo piano pieces.
Okay. So is Daisuke Suzuki based in Tokyo? Do you know? Or?
I don't know. Like I said, like I searched in English and in Japanese and couldn't find anything for the label other than, like, just listings of their releases from, like, Disc Union and various retailers. So I'm gonna guess it's based in Tokyo or in the Tokyo area, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Be interesting to track him down, right?
Yeah, I would love to find out what's going on. And I don't think Siren Records actually has that many releases. So, and to be honest, I'm not even sure it actually is still running. The last one that Robert Haigh put out on it was in 2015. So,
yeah. Well, not ancient history.
yeah.
Well, sure. You want to listen to the next track on that album, track
Sure,
B?
yeah, and I think it's a good contrast to the Juliet of the Spirits piece because it's very different.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So this is track B. Okay. So side 2 of the EP. It's called The Sitting of the Last Sema or Sema. We're not sure. He picked that word from John Cage, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I think it was a collective and like art collective that Cage and some other people were a part of or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, this one's a little bit different. So to me, it's not as beautiful. It's not the most beautiful song in the world, but it's more like kind of piano and then has some of that like kind of musique concrète kind of elements to it, like with noises and stuff. So, but yeah, we should give it a listen. And I do think it's a contrast to the Juliet of the Spirits piece.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, what's going on there?
Yeah, so again, it's that like kind of experimental side. I mean, you can hear a lot of John Cage kind of influence there, I think, even with just that like kind of piano at the beginning. And then again, all that like kind of avant-garde classical kind of stuff coming in later. And so, it is like if the first side is this like, you know, beautiful music kind of thing, this is not, you know, not that it's not beautiful, but it's trying to like, it's playing that like kind of more atonal and dissonance kind of part. And you know, he often mixes those together in even one piece, and there's a little bit of it in Juliet of the Spirits, but this is like more like sort of towards that like kind of pull. So it's, you know, it's interesting as a kind of companion piece to Juliet of the Spirits. And then I can't remember if we mentioned this before, but so the piece is called The Sitting of the Last Sema. And so Sema was the name he was using in the early 80s to put out this music that was more along these lines, like kind of more dissonant and that kind of stuff. And then as you mentioned, it is a kind of reference to something that John Cage was associated with. And then, I guess the last thing is this. So I think the sitting of the last Sema. So I think from here on, he's like sort of moving away from the Sema, like kind of era and into the Robert Haigh period.
Are there some like distant vocals there, or am I imagining that?
No, there is, I think. Yeah, it sounds like a woman's voice, like kind of a little bit operatic, like kind of in the background. Yeah, there is. I mean, I think there's a lot of like different elements kind of going on, smashed glasses, you know, for some kinds of percussion and stuff.
Yeah, at first I thought it was a woman's voice, but then I started to wonder if it was a theremin or like a singing saw or something like that.
I mean, I haven't really listened to it that closely, but I always thought it was a woman's voice. I mean, I would be surprised if he was using a theremin at that point. But it's possible. I mean, it's possible, and it's possible that he took it from something else, because I think in that Reynolds interview, he does talk about how because he ran a record store, he had access to all these like classical opera records, and I think did use some of those like samples from those in at least his music as Omni Trio. I'm not sure if he did it with this earlier stuff.
Okay, I wanted to talk about that record label a bit. Yeah, the one that put this album out. Okay, it's full screen now, right?
Now it is, yeah.
Okay, Layla. Do you think you pronounce it Layla? Layla.
Yeah. So in some interview, he actually explains that it's an acronym for I can't remember the phrase, but it's a reference to Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
And like his satanic stuff. So it's like lay all your something or love.
I have it handy.
Good.
Love always yieldeth, love always hardeneth.
Yeah.
Says it all.
Yeah, so they were an interesting label because they put out some interesting stuff, and I know you have some of their releases. Yeah, but so they're Belgian, and they were like kind of an offshoot of Le Disque du Crépuscule, or whatever it is, which also, you know, put out some interesting stuff that was like, I guess I'll say it was like kind of quasi-classical or sort of, you know, it wasn't really in the classical camp, but it was basically classical music, maybe like an alternative kind of classical music. So another guy, another composer, musician that I like a lot is Wim Mertens, who I think actually is from Belgium. And he also actually does piano stuff. And I think actually Robert Haigh uses one of his pieces in what do they call? I can't remember what they call it, but like the Wire magazine, which published that Simon Reynolds interview, also has like this another page where where it's a selection of pieces that Robert Haigh has chosen to like, you know, that he's very fond of, and Wim Mertens is one of them. So anyways, the Les Disques de Crépuscule put out stuff by like Wim Mertens and some other like kind of performers like that. And then, yeah, Layla was like more known for this like kind of British industrial stuff, and then also Laibach as well. So like Coil, Nurse with Wound, current 93.
It's called Layla Anti Records. Right. So they're making anti records. Okay, when it says notable for releasing early work from Coil, Nurse with Wound, current 93, Laibach. Do you happen to know, would that be like current 93's first release, or Nurse with Wound's first release, or is it just?
It's definitely not Nurse with Wound's first release. Because I mean, so Nurse with Wound, Stephen Stapleton had his own label called United Dairies, which actually he put out some Robert Haigh SEMA stuff as well. So, and yeah, Nurse with Wound released, I think their first release was like 1980, 1981 or something like that. And then current 93, I can't remember when their other stuff was coming out, but I'm kind of doubting it was their first release. But I think but Layla, or however it's pronounced, they were really like kind of pushing these groups that were coming out of this British scene. Yeah, except for Laibach. I mean, I never really got into Laibach, but when they were from, I want to say Czech Republic or some Eastern European country, and they were like kind of that other kind of industrial that was like, you know, pounding drums and stuff like that. More like that than like the earlier industrial stuff like Throbbing Gristle and those folks.
Okay. Shall we take a look at your discography?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so this is your the discography that you painstakingly put together. Okay.
Very much so. Yeah.
Would you like to talk us through this to some degree?
Okay, so we already mentioned his early stuff as Truth Club and Faute. I guess it's pronounced Faute. So this was his like kind of post-punk stuff, and it's interesting. I have to admit, I don't really love it. I don't listen to it a lot. But so this is, so 1980s is the first release. But I think they're performing before that in the late like 78, 79. And I think he mentions that they were like opening for like Cabaret Voltaire and some of the groups that were like kind of bigger at that time. I mean, still not that big, but bigger. And so they do, he does some stuff with them, and then he launches the SEMA stuff in 1982. And the first thing listed there is this, it's a flexi, which I actually have. I can't remember where I got it, but it's a piece called S Minor Ghost. It's a 7-inch flexi put out by Marquee Moon, which was, I guess, a label in Japan. And then it's a version of a piece that then appears later on the LP theme from Hunger, and it's redubbed SS Minor Ghost. And so again, it's the SEMA stuff is more like the Sitting of the Last SEMA piece we just listened to. It's more of that kind of music concrete stuff. And so notes from Underground and theme from Hunger, and the extract from Rose's Silver are these releases that he puts out on his own label, Luray Records, or actually I think it's just called, I guess it is Luray Records. And he, as it says up at the top, he also put out that first 7-inch by Truth Club and Faute. Let's see. So these, and they're, I think they only made like 500 pressings of each of these, so they're very out of print. And I was fortunate to have my friend went to Germany once, and he actually bought me the actual vinyl versions of these.
Oh, can you hold that up again, please?
Oh, sure.
I kind of missed getting a good shot. Oh, okay.
So yeah. So this and I don't. This and the other one. I don't think I have extract from Rose of Silver. So they're fairly rare now, and I might even be worth a chunk of change. I'm not sure how much. Again, I was really surprised that Juliet of the Spirits was only 1,500 yen, which really surprises me. But yeah, okay. On Discogs, Notes from Underground, that EP I guess it's an EP or an LP. It goes for Ichiman Yon Sen, so like over $100. But there is the label Vinyl on Demand, who they put out reissues of all these old out of print things. So they did put out this box set, so it's pretty thick.
Wow.
It's called Time Will Say Nothing, and it collects all the SEMA releases from 1982 to 1984. So it has like these SEMA things and some other unreleased stuff as well. And so I think I bought this at Disc Union in Shinjuku, and it cost me 9,000 yen. So it wasn't cheap. And also, I did want to mention as well that Juliet of the Spirits and Music from the Antechamber, and then a couple other piano albums he did in the 1980s was also put out by Vinyl on Demand as this called Cold Pieces 1985 to 89. And yeah, so even though the early stuff is out of print, that's available now, although that might also be out of print by now as well. I'm sorry, where were we? I kind of forgot.
Still 84 or so, I think, right?
Yeah. So around here. Okay. And then there's a few pieces that come out on these various compilation albums. So In Fractured Silence from Stephen Stapleton's label United Dairies. And then this Devastate to Liberate was a benefit album for the Animal Liberation Front, actually. And then Oren Sausen was a German compilation put out by Dom, which I don't know much about them. And then, I'm sorry, here's the Time Will Say Nothing vinyl on demand collection that collects all this kind of SEMA work that he did in the 80s, in the early 80s. So, that's that like kind of period in the first half of the 1980s. Then this Robert Haigh and SEMA is again and like sort of him combining his two personas as Robert Haigh and SEMA, and puts out this LP on his own label. And as we talked about before, Empire of Signs on that is a kind of early version of Juliet of the Spirits. And then in that Time Will Say Nothing reissue box, there's another bonus track as well, I think from this session. And then you can see he performed on some Nurse with Wound releases. And so it's interesting because like the Sylvian Babs High Five Companion is like this kind of crazy cut up album. It's mostly like kind of funny and humorous in a lot of ways, but it was like one of the major Nurse with Wound releases, but very different, I think, than a lot of the other stuff, because a lot of the other Nurse with Wound stuff, as you've probably heard, is either more ambient or more like kind of cut up experimental. I think the first Nurse with Wound release is dissecting on a table, something like that. Anyways, and it's very this like kind of cut up experimental stuff. But Robert Haigh contributes to both those and maybe some other pieces as well. And then from 85, he starts to put out the stuff under just his name, Robert Haigh. And then so we get the Juliet of the Spirits, a song on a compilation put out by Layla. And then music from the Antechamber, and then Valentine Out of Season was put out by United Dairies, the Stephen Stapleton label, and it is really just this like kind of solo piano music that's very much like Eric Satie and that kind of stuff. And we should talk about the Wikipedia discography page at this point, I think.
Yeah, so on Wikipedia, they mistakenly list Valentine Out of Season as, if I remember correctly, Horny Werewolf. Is that right?
That's right.
Horny Werewolf Out of Season, which is, it's quite a far cry from Valentine.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know where that comes from. I mean, maybe it's intentional, maybe it's a joke. I don't know, but it speaks to the inaccuracy, of course, of Wikipedia for all you students out there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to do a search of that phrase and just see where it originated from, or if it's only there, or.
And so as we may have mentioned this before, but so Valentine Out of Season is, I think, a John Cage piece, so it's a kind of reference to that. It's also, I think, a very beautiful album as well. And so then he does a couple more as Robert Haigh. So Valentine Out of Season. United Dairies puts out this cassette compilation called "The Best of Robert Haigh," which I never bought. I had a chance to buy it once a long time ago, but I didn't, because I had to buy. It was so United Dairies had all these like kind of cassette releases, and in order for me to get the best of Robert Haigh, I had to buy all of them. And it was this like, suitcase full of all these cassettes, and it was like $100. And so when I was in college at the time, I just didn't have that money, so I didn't buy it. So I don't have that. And I think there is a piece on there that this is the only piece that I don't have. It's this one called Robert Haigh piece, piano solo. And then in 1989, A Waltz in Plain C is he puts out on his own Luray label, and it's also, I think, it's a solo piano piece, and I don't know, for whatever reason I really love it, and again, all of that stuff has been re-released by Vinyl on Demand as a kind of small record set. And so like a Waltz in Plain C and Valentine Out of Season, I guess, so it's very much like Eric Satie. They're like these very short, fairly simple technically pieces. And I became so obsessed with the stuff that I didn't know how to play the piano, but I taught myself how to play the piano by just copying.
Oh, wow.
This stuff. Like I had a tape recorder, and I would just play it over and over again and play it on the piano, learn to play it on the piano. And I actually came up with my own notation system because I couldn't read or write music. So I had to write it in, I had to make up a system to like remember it. And so Haigh talks about in interviews, that he actually was he's self-taught. He never took piano lessons, and he taught himself how to play the piano. And also that I think he doesn't read and write music. I think he also has his own notation system that he uses to record the pieces or write the pieces down. And I think a lot of it is improvisation, or at least starts from improvisation. He just sits down at the piano, starts playing, likes something, and then continues it. Or it's just complete improvisation. And so you can kind of hear that on the pieces, and they're very minimal and very and again, like kind of very, they have the moments of beauty but also dissonance as well. And he mentions this about Satie. Like one of the reasons that Satie is not really considered a great classical composer or even pianist by true hardcore like classical music fans is because there's not a lot of technique there. It's just like very simple music. And I don't know a lot about Satie, but I think he came up with the phrase something like furniture music. He was creating furniture music, right, to just be in the background, like as people did other stuff. And so that idea, right, that music wasn't something that you listened to, that it was just in the background and was the soundtrack to your life, was very, not correct, right, not orthodox. I mean, music is something serious that you're supposed to pay attention to fully. And so and so Robert Haigh stuff is a lot like that. I mean, and also there's not this emphasis on like virtuosity and playing the piano. It's not Glenn Gould or somebody. He's just a self-taught guy who's playing these things that again are not really hard to play if you try to play it on the piano. But yeah, I don't know. To me, they're just like very lovely little pieces.
So can you still play them, or do you need to?
I actually have like an electric piano in my bedroom sitting on the side covered with boxes and things. I haven't touched it in a long time. So I don't know. I think it would take me a while to remember them, but I think I probably could still like pick it up after a while. Yeah, but they're and especially for someone who doesn't really play the piano, they're fun to play because you could actually play them.
So you've said you have all his recordings except that one track.
Yeah, so everything except for that best of Robert Haigh cassette. Yeah,
Okay. So that's all the Sema material and all the Robert Haigh material.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I actually don't have the vinyl or versions of like the Truth Club and the really early stuff, but all the Robert Haigh and Sema stuff I do have. Yeah. And then he continues throughout the 2000s to release these all these like kind of piano albums. And so and some of them are released by the Siren Records label in Japan. Again, we mentioned Daisuke Suzuki before. Again, very mysterious. I don't know anything about the label, and I don't think they have that many releases, but they put out this trio of albums in 2009 to 2011 that are, I think, also very, very beautiful. Then he starts to release some stuff on other labels, and then this Cold Pieces compilation comes out. Then he does another Siren release in 2015, The Silence of Ghosts. And then more recently, he's been releasing stuff on Unseen Worlds it started in Austin, Texas, and I think now it's in New York City. And so, and especially with these last three, Creatures of the Deep, Black Saravan, and Human Remains, I think he's starting to get more attention. Creatures of the Deep was very much hailed as a great album, I guess, or whatever. But by certain critics who like a particular type of music. And then I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious, how old is he now? Do we have any idea about?
I'm going to say he's either late 50s or maybe even early 60s. Okay. He's probably about 5 or 6 years older than I am, I think. Yeah. And so okay. And then in the 90s, he starts to get into the drum and bass stuff that we mentioned at the beginning. So he does some stuff under the name Splice, and performs with all these other groups like Rhodes K and Persons Unknown back to back. And again, I don't know anything about the drum and bass scene, so I don't know much about this stuff. But it was, as we talked about at the beginning, this is when he has his own record store and he's starting to do the stuff on his own. And he just he developed. He has some kind of like sense of music or whatever that he brings to this drum and bass like kind of genre that that makes him very successful eventually as the Omni Trio.
So when you say very successful, I'm just kind of curious, like in the drum and bass world, was he was able to make a living off this stuff for a while, or it was
I think so.
Big payday for him, or
yeah. I mean, I think. I mean, I don't know how much, but I do think it was able to finance his record store and his life. I think he had 2 kids at this point. And if you go scroll down a bit to the Omni Trio section, again, hardcore or real drum and bass fans probably know this more than I do. But a lot of this stuff is considered to be like revolutionary and like really genre defining. And if you go down a little bit more, as a measure of his success, so 17, and so one of the Omni Trio songs was used in the video game Grand Theft Auto. So it had reached that like kind of level. And then 2005, there's another Omni Trio song used in another video game. So I mean, certainly in the scene like outside London, the rave and drum and bass and techno and all that kind of stuff scene, I think Omni Trio was very big. But even outside of that, I think, around the world, it was very, very well known. Yeah, and then he has all these other like various things that he was doing. So I think these were all people that he sort of knew through his record store that he was doing this stuff with. And then this Murray Fontana Orchestra thing is a kind of a throwback to his days with Stephen Stapleton and the group, the Hafler Trio, Andrew I think it's Andrew Mackenzie. And Stahlplot was another like kind of interesting label that put out like Soviet France and other industrial music.
All right. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for putting that all together.
Yeah, it was a labor of love. I really just started it just to like sort of see, to make sure I had what I had, and that I had everything that I wanted. Again, I don't have most of the drum and bass stuff, but I wanted to nail down the Robert Haigh and Sema stuff.
Well, ska samma.
Thank you.
Well, shall we look at that antechamber?
Oh yeah.
Called Music from the Antechamber.
Music from the Antechamber. Yeah.
Okay, we could listen to a couple of tracks off that. Let me pause. Okay, we're going to look at the first track off Music from the Antechamber.
Right.
A companion piece to Juliet of the Spirits, right? A companion EP. The first track called Passage, about a short 2-minute track. We'll just play it in its entirety. So let me make sure I'm sharing the sound properly. Just a moment. Bye-bye. So by his standards, that piece is almost showy, right?
You mean in terms of like technique or what?
Yeah. I mean, it to me, it doesn't strike me as minimal as the other ones. You know,
Yeah,
like just
that's true.
so much time between notes and everything. Like that.
Yeah, it's very lush and full. It's still actually very easy to play though. I mean, there's a little bit of overdubbing, so you can't play everything, but I mean the basic thing is actually not that hard. And I mean, I don't think it's like revolutionary in any kind of sense. It's just I think a pretty piece. And yeah, I mean, and again, I think he's not really about like uh, being a virtuoso piano player or even being like a groundbreaking composer. He's just creating these pieces that speak to him musically and to at least some other people. I mean, I think his audience will always be fairly limited, unfortunately.
The cover art is interesting.
Yeah. Again, like I haven't looked at these records in a long time, so I didn't remember that there was those like kind of frogs or beasts in the background or whatever.
So let's see. That's the opening track, Passage,
right?
And then Dante.
Undone, yeah. And so that one has guitar and some percussion, as it says, and then the color red actually is sounds very much like Philip Glass in a lot of ways. It's fair, and I think he's mentioned Philip Glass as an influence on his stuff as well.
Yeah, I see what you mean about it being a companion. So, well, same label, and it was released shortly after, right?
Right, the year after, 86, yeah.
And he seems to be at a similar point in his development, I guess, at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yes, Ed Chan, thank you for joining us again and
for having me. Yeah.
Giving us your world-class expertise on Robert Haigh, right?
My music geekness.
Okay, and we're going to go out with the first track off his 2017 album, Creatures of the Deep. The first track, Portrait with Shadow. So what are your thoughts on this track?
Again, I just think it's like an achingly beautiful piece. Again, there's no technical mastery or anything like that. It doesn't revolutionize piano composition. Again, I think classical music snobs would hate it and or not even pay attention to it. But I think it's beautiful. And I mean, I do think it's representative of the last few releases he's done in the last 5 years or so. And yeah, so when I think like, what is it that I like about Robert Haigh, and why do I buy everything he puts out and all that kind of stuff? It's really, and it's, I don't know, it's really just that what he captures in these, again, technically simple pieces. And I don't know anything about musicology, so even in terms of music theory, I mean, maybe it's not even very interesting. But nevertheless, I think it just has this impact, at least on me, and I'm sure other people as well, that might be in a fairly narrow, like, kind of demographic, but he's just one of those people that I think deserves to be known more needs more exposure. Other than his life as Omni Trio, which I think he was basically a rock star, as Omni Trio, but this other stuff is more under the radar. So yeah, so I think this piece, is very representative of the rest of the album and his recent stuff, and it's just a simple little piano tune, but it's I think beautiful.
Okay, good. I'll play it in its entirety. It's about 2 minutes, so why not, right? So yeah, thanks for everyone for watching, and Ed, thanks for joining me again. And here we go.